and welcome to our Arts, Parks, and Los Angeles River Committee. We have all members here today. I would like to welcome Councilmember David Rue, Councilmember Koretz, Councilmember Price, and Councilmember Blumenfield. We will call this meeting to order. And seeing as we have a general public comment card, we will start with general public comment. And since the person who is going by letters and numbers filled out comment cards on everything, I will give this person, PC, 5 minutes to complete all of your comments.
Yes, PC 422A of the California Penal Code, criminal threats. So what happens when you try to enter this building on Friday and try to go to a city council meeting and a budget meeting? You get surrounded by a bunch of LAPD detectives because they said your council president is in fear for his life.
Mr. Chairman, this is not within the
it's general public comment. It's general public comment.
But
it's general public
subject matter
is being able to walk around in the city as a free man.
Subject matter of what's on the committee
agenda
today.
I'm sorry, arts. So can somebody on a public speaker card put a work of art on it and yet have it prosecuted as a felony because somebody thinks it's a terrorist threat? Because that is art.
Okay, so that's warning number one. You want to stick to...
Okay. So, trying to talk about the County of Los Angeles Department of Parks and Recreation, why does the city attorney need to know the fact that somebody sometimes to attend this meeting has to post a $75,000 bond to enter this building? But getting on to number two, the City Planning Department and the Department of Recreation and Parks wants to know about public recreation plans. Well, one good plan you should have is to allow people to attend public meetings without posting a financial bond. Because under the Ralph M. Brown Act, as my understanding is, there is no fee to attend a sanctioned public meeting. And as I understand it, also under the California Constitution, Section 2, it applies to the Los Angeles City Council because this entire agenda is being processed by a municipal corporation under the laws of the state of California. And therefore, all of these items and all of these procedures and all of these meetings have to be done pursuant to state law and federal law. But allowing somebody not to attend a meeting without posting a $75,000 bond on a false charge of criminality, in my opinion, is not making this meeting legal. Because the only way that I could be here today is to put up my house as collateral for the bond and a 10% fee. Thank you, VIP bonds. So, why is it that you're running this meeting today in the middle of a situation of danger? Apparently, your Department of Recreation and Parks and your kids' committees and everybody here in this building don't seem to have a real problem. Yet, certain speakers, unfortunately, have to post financial bonds to talk about these wonderful subjects. So should we approve any of these items today, or is your fiscal impact changing dramatically to other priorities besides arts, parks, and rivers? General public comment on the subject of the Ralph M. Brown Act. Well, you might have other priorities that may prevent you from financing these projects. For example, outside attorney's fees for litigation against the city for violation of civil rights could delay and hinder the Arts, Parks, and Rivers Committee budget. Falsely charging a person with a felony is also something that may require outside counsel depreciating the Arts, Parks, and Rivers budget. Because I would like to see the money in the budget go to arts, parks, and rivers. Not defending the city against false criminal charges and making somebody post a $75,000 bond out of LA City custody to attend this meeting today. And I think all of you can agree on that. I think that's a reasonable request. But you see, the problem is that some of us, we speak the truth too much. And some of us have a lot more influence than others. And a lot of us control an LAPD, and a lot of us, we get arrested illegally and sometimes even shot illegally by the LAPD. So I ask you to consider these items that I brought to your attention, because now I'm going to 11000 Wilshire Boulevard this afternoon, and you know who's there.
Colleagues, what I would like to do before we get into the meat of the agenda is take items 3 through 7 on consent without objection. Items 3 through 7.
I'll move that.
All right. Mr. Price moves. Mr. Roos seconds. So be it. Items 3 through 7 have been taken on consent, which brings us to item number 1. Mr. Sutton-Willis, will you please read the item?
Item number 1, County of Los Angeles Department of Parks and Recreation to provide information briefing relative to the findings in their county-wide comprehensive parks and recreation needs assessment final report.
Thank you so much. And I have in my notes that we have John Wicker, Director of, and also Jane Beasley. And we have a third person.
Norma Garcia.
And Norma. Oh, Norma Garcia. Hi.
Hey.
Long time no see. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. So, colleagues, I've invited representatives of the County Department of Parks and Recreation to present some of the preliminary findings of their recently completed county-wide comprehensive parks and recreation needs assessment report. And with that, please take it away.
Well, great. Well, thank you for inviting us here today and giving us an opportunity to talk to you about our comprehensive countywide park and recreation needs assessment. It's certainly a thrill for us to be able to have a chance to address all of you today. So, as you know, you've already met our team that's here, and this has been the team that's really been shepherding this project along, as well as our consultant team, too. So, I want to talk to you a little bit first about the history of Proposition A and how we got to the point that we're in at this time. And so, as all of you know, in 1992 and in 96, our voters passed Proposition A, the first assessment and then the second assessment as well. And so that's what actually, those propositions actually created two functions. One was the creation of the Regional Park and Open Space District, of which Jane Beasley is the administrator of that district. And then two, it established an annual property tax for basically everybody in the county of Los Angeles. Over the last 24 years, Proposition A has generated approximately $1.5 billion. And through that investment, we've done a lot of great things. As you can see on the chart there, over 328 new children play areas, 350 new and refurbished recreation, senior, community, and nature centers. And I won't name all of them, but a lot was really accomplished with that $1.5 billion. So the first proposition, Prop A of 92, actually expired last year in June of 2015. And with that, approximately $60 million annually has been lost or is no longer being paid into the Regional Park and Open Space District. And in 2019, the rest of the second Proposition A will actually expire, and an additional $21 million will no longer be paid into the Open Space District.
Nope, wrong, backwards.
Now,
How much does the district have now, each of those districts? How much is in there now? Just curious.
how much is left?
How much is in the, yes?
Right now remaining, it's a fluid number. Last quarterly report was 80 million, but we've allocated since then. We're at about $60 million remaining.
That's in the,
In the Prop A.
That's in the
Prop A.
existing Prop A. Yeah. So back in 2014, with the first Prop A expiring, our County Board of Supervisors actually brought together a Proposition P, which was placed on the November 2014 ballot. And unfortunately, Prop P didn't pass. We had a little over 62% of the vote, and it takes a supermajority, or 66.6%, to actually pass it. But we learned quite a few things from that proposition.
Keep going.
Oops, going the wrong way. Yeah, and so that's what kind of led us to the needs assessment, and I'm going to let Norma Garcia kind of walk you through the needs assessment.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having us. I serve as the Deputy Director overseeing the Planning and Development Agency of Los Angeles County Parks and Recreation. I'm very thrilled to be part of this effort. After Proposition P failed, the supervisors, and you heard from the LA Times and you heard from a lot of advocates, park advocates, that there were some serious concerns about putting together another effort. One, that the community was not involved in the decision-making of how the money would be spent. Two, what were the needs? There was really, while we know kind of inherently that there are park and recreation needs, we have many communities that don't have the park and recreation services. But really there was no way to quantify those needs or really highlight even how much those needs would cost. So the Board of Supervisors directed us, specifically in a motion by Supervisor Antonovich and Supervisor Mark Willie Thomas, directing our department to do the first ever county park needs assessment. And they were very clear. This is not just about the county, but we wanted to ensure that we engage all of the 88 cities in Los Angeles County, as well as the advocates and the stakeholders, and in particular the community. So we had, I think, one of the limiting and challenges was absolutely the time. So I want to acknowledge that to do a really comprehensive effort of this magnitude, no, it's never been done in the country, and we looked at and we called and we talked to everywhere that had a large metropolis like LA County. And so we took a lot of the best management practices, but a lot of it was really thinking about developing a framework to engage 88 cities in an equitable fashion. And so I want to say, when we answer questions about why certain things, took place that, in the city of Los Angeles and, and how were you involved, it was really looking at 88 cities and making sure that they were all engaged equitably. So there were a couple of things. One, that the board directed us to consider park an open space, look at key infrastructure. This is not a deferred maintenance study, and it's really, when you look at the $21 billion, this does not capture the entire need of all our park and recreation departments throughout the county. But this captures the priorities. Two, it was really important that we establish metrics, common metrics. And I have to say that these are the most progressive, I think, park and recreation metrics, which I'll talk to really quickly, shortly. And we wanted to ensure that the community, as well as the departments, the park and recreation departments of the 88 cities, were both engaged in a process to determine what those community priorities are. So quickly, what we had to do is the Board of Supervisors directed us to establish a steering committee. The purpose of the steering committee was to guide the development of the framework. So as LA County approached the needs assessment, all of the questions and all of the conversations and discussions that led to decision-making weren't had. So this was had by the steering committee. And who comprised the steering committee? We had the COGS, each member, the Council of Governments, each had a representative, same as kind of what Metro has been working on. In the city of Los Angeles, you're large enough, so you had Deputy Mayor Barbara Romero representing the city of Los Angeles. The Board of Supervisors also were tasked to appoint 5 members to a steering committee each. 2 members from the community, 2 from the community members at large, and 1 staff member. And I have to say that almost all supervisors ensured that there was at least an advocate from the city of Los Angeles. So you had really strong advocates at the table: KYCC, Neighborhood Land Trust, South LA Trust. I mean, Pacoima beautiful. So the city of Los Angeles was very represented. Even, unfortunately, the late Mary Kaufman, who represented the equine community, represented equine and was on the steering committee. We also had organizations like First 5 LA and Community and Senior Services and the Conservation Corps that each represented the youth, the seniors, and the children in this discussion. In regards to the study areas, so the steering committee then guided a process to really divide the county into an equitable framework that looked at needs. The city of Los Angeles and the county, I think, were the most complicated in this process. You have 15 council districts, but if we divided the city of LA in 15 council districts, we wouldn't give you your fair share because your council districts were really huge, sometimes equitable to 4 or 5 cities in LA County. So we looked at a geographic and a population framework that looked at, in the city of LA, we used your community planning areas. Some of your planning areas had over 150,000 people. So what we did is we even disaggregated them a little bit more. And so in the city of LA, you had a total of 43 study areas. In total in the county, we had 188. And that's how we began to really look at needs. So we inventoried about 9,000 amenities, 3,000 parks. We realized we also looked at natural areas, regional open space, your regional parks, and local parks. One thing to mention, in Los Angeles County, 1.7% of all park and open space land is local parkland. 85% is natural areas. We also established really important metrics. And the city of LA, the county of LA, and all 87 cities have different metrics. A common metrics used to determine park need is acres per every 1,000 residents. But we knew that that would not tell the story. And unfortunately, I think we're really trailblazing in this regard. So the steering committee led us to condition of the parks. And I have to say that this was very important for many of your residents in the city of Los Angeles. In some of the communities, you may have parks, but you don't have the resources to ensure that those amenities are in good quality. In some communities, and you'll see, especially in the core of the city of Los Angeles, you really have dire need for park land, really non-existent. Park access too, and so we looked at, freeways, railroad lines, large really impediments to access. And so what we looked at access is making sure that every child and family can walk to a park within a half-a-mile radius or a 10-minute walk. Park pressure, and that's density. In some of the communities have really high density, and you can't compare one park with high density and another park that doesn't serve as many residents. And lastly, the type of amenities. You may have a pocket park with nice green space, but that pocket park doesn't have a baseball field. That pocket park doesn't offer programming because there's no community building or there's no gymnasium. So we also did a comparison of what amenities exist in certain study areas that don't exist in others. So this is kind of some of the key findings we know, and I have to say the city of LA is a little bit more exacerbated when it comes to some of these findings. 51% of Los Angeles County residents do not have a park in walking distance. We know that if you look at this map, this is countywide, but when you think about Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles, most of the city of Los Angeles, not all, but most of the city of Los Angeles has high need, very high need area. And what you find here is that it's not just in the South LA, it's in the east portion of your city. It's in the North County, it's in Koreatown, it's in various parts of the city. So what this really found is that there's a high need due to the density, due to the conditions of the park, due to enable limited access to parks. I want to mention one more stat, if you don't mind. And the average county, just one statistic, the average county, there's 3.3 acres for every 1,000 residents, countywide average. The people in the red, your communities in red, and many in the city of Los Angeles, those communities have less than 0.7 acres of parkland for every 1,000 residents. The people living in the communities in the orange are 1.6. clearly less than the county average. And you start seeing that areas or communities or residents that live in the darker green have 52 acres of parkland for every 1,000 residents. So in the community engagement process, and I want to commend your city staff and your Park and Recreation Department, or your Rec and Park Department, we're Parks and Rec. I think your city had the biggest burden because you serve so many residents. So to develop a community engagement process, I mean, I think it was easy for the city of Arcadia, the city of Maywood to host one meeting. It was the burden of the city of Los Angeles to host 43 different meetings. And I know that some of them were consolidated. So I really want to commend your staff for this effort. But over 177 community meetings were held citywide, countywide. They were held between December and February, and we also know that this was during the holidays, and unfortunately, because of the timing of the needs assessment, we couldn't get around that. Your residents told us from each study area what were the top 10 prioritized projects, and those are listed in the final report. And we know, the next. We have over 4,000 projects that were prioritized. Over 1,800 countywide in each study area. And the 4,000 also include the natural areas, the open space, all of the regional parks as well. We also hired a consultant so that it wasn't the burden. We knew that the cities were already doing so much for this effort. So a consultant worked with the city of Los Angeles, and they were part of the focus group that helped to determine how we would develop a framework for cost estimation. But a little bit of more information, 46% of all the 4,000 projects were repairs. Residents said we need to repair or replace our existing infrastructure. 34 is we need to add an amenity. We heard we need to add a skate park. We need to add a swimming pool. We need to add a gymnasium. And these are just some of the stats. And 20%, over 200 were we need a new park because in these communities we don't have parks. And that resulted in about $21.5 billion. I want to mention, once again, reiterate, this is not a deferred maintenance needs. This is not a deferred maintenance. Your city and your parks have much more needs than what is reflected here. But this does reflect the top 10 projects from each study area and also includes the regional parks and the open space that is within the city of Los Angeles' purview.
So on May 3rd, we went back to the supervisors as requested and presented this report to them. And the other thing we presented to them, we should ask if you have any questions on the needs assessment.
I think let's hear the whole report, and then we'll all have some questions, okay. I'm sure. Thank you.
Can I just, before we lose that slide, what was the percentage of new parks versus fixed repair?
Sure, let's go back to that. So 46% of the residents in Los Angeles County stated that they needed support and resources. So those projects were about repairing and replacing. For example, we know that some of our playground equipment can't be repaired. They just are not compliant with ADA standards, et cetera. They're not safe. Many of these are health and safety items. And so this, we see that some of those were about replacing. 34% were adding new amenities because amenities weren't or aren't available for your residents. Also in the report and in the executive summary, you also have a comparison of how Los Angeles County compares to nationwide to some amenities, and I can go over them, but it's in this report. So you'll know how we fare in comparison to national standards when it comes to gymnasiums, when it comes to swimming pools, when it comes to dog parks, when it comes to splash pads. So you'll have that comparison. So many of these residents were given that information, and so they derived their priority projects based on this information.
Good. Yep. So on May 3rd, we presented this information to the Board of Supervisors, and we also presented to them at their request. Last August, they asked us to prepare a draft funding measure that could meet the needs assessment and help fund the projects that Prop A has also funded over all these years, the same type of projects. So the goal would be renew expiring dedicated funding, protect the local water resources, create safe play areas and reduce gang activity, create and maintain neighborhood and city parks. Those are the priorities of this draft funding measure. So the framework in a nutshell, it's a parcel tax based on what we're proposing. This is a draft, and what we're proposing is a parcel tax based on cents per square foot of structural development on a parcel. So the size of the building on the parcel in square footage. So if it was 3 cents, because we proposed both 3 cents at a 1,500 square foot home, it would be $45 annually. It would bring in $189 million annually. If it was at 5 cents a square foot, a 1,500 square foot home would be $75 annually. The total revenue would be $309. The term right now is drafted at 35 years, and there is a low-income senior exemption. All public property is exempt from this. And this is a draft, just so you all know. We're taking comments, and any kind of input you have, we'd be happy to hear. So the expenditure plan looks like this. 77% would go to projects that are prioritized and identified, but capital projects within the county. 15% would be for maintenance and servicing. This is a figure that comes out of Prop A, has been very successful, and the cities have really utilized this funding. It helps to maintain projects that were funded by Prop A. This would be to maintain these projects that are past or in the past funded and projects into the future. The remaining 8% would be for the open space district, for program implementation, for technical innovations, and we'll get into that. So there are 5 grant categories in the 77%. Right now, 27% goes back. It's called the community-based park investment. And what that is the money back to each study area. So with we have drafted a formula. It's under consideration. It involves per capita and square foot of development. But this would go back to each of the study areas. What the board would like to see is this be delegated to the director so that every grant doesn't have to go back to the board, but that the study areas would have those monies, they could apply for those grants, and we could move them forward. So in your case, in the city of LA, we're talking about 43 study areas, which is, from an administrative perspective, going to be fun, but hey, it gets us back to those study areas. 15.4% would go back into the study areas that are very high in high need. And I counted those this morning, and 26 of them are within the city of LA. Yeah. So that would be additional funding to those specific study areas. And it would be very much like the first category, delegated to those study areas, and then grants coming out of that are consistent with or called out in the needs assessment. 15.4% would go to open spaces, rivers, watershed, helping protect those things that we've already invested money in. And then 15.4% to regional recreational facilities, trail connectors, accessibility, can you get into a park? And then 3.8% is youth and veteran training and placement opportunities. The old Prop A had a requirement, had a request that you hire youth with every capital project. That was a little problematic. So what we've decided to do with this one is actually grant funds to programs like the Corps and other agencies that do this work. So 50 of the maintenance and servicing, 51% would go to the cities, 29% to the county departments, and 20% to local agencies. There's the public agencies like Mountain Recreation and Conservation Authority, Northeast Trees, and the Land Trust would also be able to access these funds. 8% to the district would be strategic planning, technical assistance, needs assessment updates, innovative electronic technologies, which I think you all know how people get the information about parks. That's on their phone. So we're hoping that these funds could go to websites, mobile websites, that kind of work that is very hard to get to with capital funding with grants. And the operations of the open space district, since it is supposed to maintain itself at no cost to the county. So the support, in last December we did do some polling, and overall 69% of likely voters in November of 16 would initially vote yes in favor, and after some education, 75% would vote in favor of. And of those voters that would vote in favor of, 3 out of 4 perceive that there is need for an additional funding for Parks and Recreation. So the next steps, we take this draft plan, which is on a website, which is here in a link, but we'll take the final report back to the board on the 21st, and they will decide if they want to put it on the ballot, change it. It goes to them for action. So they ask us to report back on June 21st. That gives us roughly right around June 1st to finalize this. We probably have a few more days after that, but as you all know, we have to then get it ready for a board meeting. So we are taking input. So here's where you can find the full report of the park needs assessment. You have before you the executive summary. The full report is online, has all the detail in it. The draft report for the park funding measure is up online, as well as any kind of information sheets and that kind of stuff up on the Open Space District's website. So I guess now, if you have questions, we'll be happy to take.
Quick question for you, Ms. Beasley. You mentioned the 21st. Do you mean May 21st or June?
June 21st.
June 21st.
June 21st, yes,
So,
please.
so you also mentioned June 1st.
I think that's a deadline we'll probably be finalizing to be able to take something to the board that's, got to go up to the public,
Because what's the deadline to have something put on the ballot, isn't
August
it?
9th.
August 9th. Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right. Anything to add?
No, that's it. We're available for any questions you might have.
Terrific, thank you. And what I think we can probably crank the lights back up if someone could do that. And also we have our General Manager of LA City Recreation and Parks, Mike Scholl. And Mike, if you'd like to add anything to this time in terms of the city process, that might be helpful. And thank you for attending.
Thank you, council members. No, I mean, I would just say that, John and his team did an incredible job, putting this together. It's a huge amount of work. Us being one of the, being the largest city in it, was also a lot of work on our behalf. We did a lot of community meetings, I think 23 in all, across the city. But this is really needed. I mean, this is, there is no park funding coming down anywhere, and this is probably the most real opportunity that we have for the future of not just our park system, but the entire county.
Terrific. Well, I want to commend all of you for, first of all, colleagues, I wanted to have this report before our committee. There is no formalized process beyond the efforts that Mike and his team have led for the City of LA, but I thought it was important for us to hear more about this exciting initiative in this committee. This is just a report, so it's a great time to hear the details of the diligence, I think, that the team did, and it just sounds great. I was just ticking off questions that I had prepared, and I'm down to just a very few because you've answered most of them, and I want to thank you. And Ms. Garcia, our long work at the LA River all these years, I think you have a really good perspective on park needs in the county and the Los Angeles River, so I'm very cheered to hear about the considerable percentage of dollars that would go toward river enhancements, river improvements, et cetera, because there's such a focus on the river, and I really appreciate that. What other types of findings, speaking of the Los Angeles River, did you make in terms of population, accessibility, the demographics, the income levels, et cetera? We're collecting so much data on the river, and I'm curious to see if you can encapsulate that in terms of this process and what that means.
So one of the difficulty about doing a comprehensive needs assessment is that early on we didn't have the opportunity to do a needs assessment on and include rivers. There's so many tributaries and rivers throughout Los Angeles County, some developed, some non-developed. Some planning process were very advanced. But as a very important opportunity is residents along the river identified parks, identified projects that can serve both to revitalize the river as well as to provide that need for open space and park and recreation. One of the things that I didn't mention is also when we presented the report to the Board of Supervisors, we had Dr. Simon, Paul Simon, from Public Health, and he is the leading expert when it comes to issues of chronic disease and diabetes and obesity. And he really made some really, I think, alarming and strong correlations between the lack of parks, infrastructure, and public health. And what he stated is that children and families who live in park-poor areas, many of the areas in red, many of the areas in orange, in the city of Los Angeles have less than life expectancy than families and children who live in park-rich areas. Mm-hmm. And so what you also see in this report is that there's very strong correlation and very much information about public health, obesity, diabetes, also pedestrian collisions. We heard, and I think this resembled the needs assessment that Rec and Parks did in 2009, where residents told you then that trails were very important, making sure that that children and families had access to parks and community infrastructure were very important. So, and that aligns very much with some of the priorities for, connecting to the river, creating those access and those corridors to the river. But it really stemmed from, it really looked at that these were very important elements throughout the Los Angeles County.
I am so glad you're making the link between childhood obesity rates and active recreation and access to parks, because the state of California itself has a higher national average of childhood obesity, and then Los Angeles's numbers are off the charts. We have a real obesity epidemic in childhood obesity epidemic in Los Angeles in particular.
Our partners at First Five, which I know have been very involved in the city of Los Angeles as well, have also made a strong correlation with the mental health and social behavior of children and the lack of parks. So while we used to see park and recreation infrastructure as the extracurricular activity for children, what now research and our expert colleagues are telling us that it's absolutely important infrastructure. Children no longer have the informal infrastructure where, and you think about our childhood, whether you lived in a poor community or rich community, you rode your bike, you played tag in the streets, you climb over fences, you climb trees. Children no longer have access to these really informal recreational activities because they're battling traffic, they're battling crime, they're battling gangs, they're battling a lot of the issues. So our colleagues in public health and First Five have also made a strong correlation, not just to public health, but mental health, as well as important for children to really have the social positive behavior in growing up in communities.
Those are great points. So a couple of questions for anyone. What types of new activities are setting trends for communities to desire to have in our parks? What types of new activities? You mentioned skateboarding, which isn't new, but we know we need a lot more skateboard parks. We know that. But what are some of the other?
Well, it seems like dog parks as well.
Okay.
Skate parks are all big in the area. Those are some of the most frequent requests we get in the county. Mike, how about the city?
All that,
Soccer.
trails, walking paths, fitness zones, just really informal
Fitness
recreation.
zone. So the fitness equipment that we're installing wherever we can, that's popular?
Very, very popular.
Yeah, okay. And how about soccer? Did it loom large?
Generally, soccer, for the city of LA, we need more fields.
Yeah,
there's just not enough. I think that's countywide.
Not
There's
enough real estate.
fields. Yeah.
We have real estate issues with soccer.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a countywide issue. Everybody needs more soccer fields as well.
One of those issues that you can combat that with, and which this measure would help with, is doing more synthetic fields, because then they can basically run 24/7, 365 days a year with safe play. I always say, like, a synthetic field is like adding 3 fields all in one. I mean, It's like you do one and then you get 2 extra as a result.
And one of your statistics up there verified what many of us have been feeling anecdotally, and that is our constituents are concerned with just the maintenance and improvement and of our parks. New parks, we need them desperately, especially in the areas that are underserved, but the parks that we do have need an infusion of resources to maintain, improve, make more accessible, make more inviting, and more usable.
Definitely. That was a definite point that we saw in our meetings that we had held throughout the county. And a lot of people, they're very proud and they really relate to their neighborhood park. And what they really want to see, though, is they want to see improvements to those facilities that they currently have, because theirs are outdated and they break down a lot, or they have a lot of issues with them. So that was a constant trend, definitely.
Right.
An opportunity that we also heard throughout the county, and I think when we first met and working on, I think one of the impediments to bringing a pocket park to the LA River was, where is the maintenance and operation going to come from? And so we spent about so much time. I think what we realized is, you looked at the areas in red that have 0.7 acres for every 1,000 residents. We will need 8,000 acres of land to get them to the county average. We know that's not going to happen unless we get a bulldozer and knock down homes, and it's not going to happen. But I think what this measure and funding will allow us to do is to really get into creative solutions and the joint use. And it's not just with schools, but really I think one of the innovative projects that John is spearheading is looking at library spaces, and can we put fitness zones in libraries? Could we add children play area, maybe not the huge structures, but some that engage in physical activity as children are going into the libraries, but really thinking about creative solutions, because we know that it's not just about building the parks. We will never get there to meet the need, but this will give us the opportunity to bring the dollars to really help to innovate and create those opportunities.
It's important to take a fresh look at all of our publicly owned real estate
Right.
and how we can better activate it. And I'll say it again, I've said many times before, and we're working with LAUSD, but accessibility and support and enthusiasm and motivation for our schools as community centers and joint use and shared use, they're not into it like they need to be. They're not focused like they need to be. And one of the requests that we made to the search team when they were looking for a new superintendent was, we need LAUSD to be on board with joint use. And so we'll keep driving home that point as well, because we know in schools that have them, they've worked quite well. Not without their own little issues, but the fact that we've made some of our schools available on the weekends for soccer play and handball and whatever it is, that's a good thing. Now, in the report, you do have very district-specific items, and I'll just call out Elysian Park as well as one of the regional parks that could potentially have a little bit of something for everyone. Right now it doesn't, but it potentially could. Now, there's a little more active recreation in Elysian Park, and we want to strike the right balance, so I think I'm glad to see those goals called out in this report. And also, just something to mention is the Hollywood Cap Park proposal that is in East Hollywood. It's a 1 mile long, 44-acre park proposal over the 101 freeway that would serve neighborhoods where the average household income is $23,000 a year. One of the most park poor. Now, we've got Griffith Park up the street, but it's not really within walking distance, not really. So I would love to cobble together additional resources to help make that vision a reality as well. It's not some big fancy Hollywood plan. It's a plan to place a park where there is no real estate and in a very park poor area for families that desperately need active recreation. So that's that. And then, so with that, let's colleagues' questions, comments. I'll open it up right now, starting with Mr. Blumenfield.
Thank you. You were talking about the LA River, and is it actually called out in terms of a number or percentage or anything like that?
No, actually, this measure is actually written without any specified projects called out, with the exception of the priority projects in each study area. So there is a category that includes the river as well as open space, and that's 15.4% of the money, but it doesn't call out the LA River, which is important to you all, or the San Gabriel, which is important on the other side of the county, or the Santa Clara up on the northern part. So it doesn't have any of those projects.
So the LA River stuff is lumped in with the open space.
Yes.
And, although I guess theoretically.
Or in the study areas.
Or both.
Right.
Because it seems like there can be overlap between
Correct. Exactly.
all
there
the
could
different
be.
categories that you're talking about in terms of things that come to mind that would qualify for multiple.
It was very intentional, because some of the competitive grants, which is the open space category, will take longer to come to fruition than the money that goes directly to the study area. And some of these projects were prioritized in those portions of the city. So.
And in terms of the maintenance, the percent maintenance, you made a point when you were talking about that does not include current.
No, it would include current.
Okay, it does include. So what was the maintenance in the original Prop A?
It was 15% of the total measure.
And this is also.
Right. But it would be a higher volume because it's a higher volume measure. But the percentages, I know the city of LA had a very special case with its M&S. Michael is very familiar with this, but with the open space district, the city opted to bond a large portion of its M&S money to pay for capital projects at the zoo. So it was only able to capture a small percentage of its M&S, and it uses that money very well annually. And you paid for the zoo project as well. So as this comes forward, I would hope the city doesn't make that move again and uses its M&S in total annually. Because like the Department of Park and Rec in the county, it's a fairly large sum of money annually. And it goes back to refurbishing those projects that people are saying, hey, my playground is not up to speed. So.
just, you would think that it would have to be larger than the original Prop A
Yep.
because it's got to include all the original stuff and the new stuff. You're saying it's the same?
That would be that's a great comment for you to make to me. I'm happy to take that comment back if you would like to see M&S greater.
Well, I'd like to see it cover what, obviously, I love new shiny things and want new parks, but I also want to make sure that we're
Right.
taking care of our
Which is
current
why
park.
it does include that. I mean, but right.
But is it not, am I getting it wrong in terms of,
Well,
we have this block where we had 15%, that's all worn off, now we have a new
Right.
block, and unless it seems like we'd have to substantially increase the percentage.
well, but the percentage is the same, but the tax is greater, so the actual volume of M&S is greater because you went from roughly 80 million coming in a year up to 189 million, just use that number, 189 million a year. So percentage-wise, from a volume of dollars, you've gone up, so the percentage could maintain itself, but the volume dollars goes up. And I would think that as what we've done in the past is the money almost act like trust accounts. Like the City of LA's money goes to the City of LA sub-account, and then you guys invoice against it. But that money would go into the account, and if Rec and Parks doesn't, bill up to it, it just sits there until they start to bill against it. So I would hope that this money is too great as we start and would get smaller, and also built into this measure is the ability of the supervisors to change the 77 and 15% to increase M&S over time if that recommendation was made. So like 10 years out, if we need to increase M&S, we could change the capital versus M&S money so the M&S could go up as a percentage, just to help reflect that.
Okay, because the volume thing doesn't seem to make sense to me, because even if you increase the volume, it's still the same percentage of.
Well, but I think the clarification is that while the Prop A was 15% and the next measure or draft is 15%, which the volume, it was $82 million in comparison to $189 million. So 15% for the proposed, it's much greater in regards to volume of funding. So the 15% captures the previous Prop A as well as all the new M&S. Does that make sense?
But more dollars.
More dollars.
It's more dollars, almost double the dollars as the first Prop A.
Right, but so is the capital is also doubled.
Yeah, that's true. Exactly.
So if you're doubling the capital, unless it's not a direct proportional.
Right,
That's right.
I agree.
Yeah.
But we're trying to get to it, and I would say this money, the whole volume of money for capital projects and the volume for the maintenance was never meant to replace everything, because what we do hear from our cities is don't replace program, definitely. But that there is a responsibility to each city and not just to the open space district to help defer some of these costs. This is just one way to get at deferring those costs.
And then there was a certain amount that you had, like, with 51% or something, that was going to cities?
27.
What is it?
It's 27, right? Oh, 51% of M&S goes to the cities.
Yeah, and so then how do you decide within the cities, is it a per population base? Like, how does LA, obviously you don't divide it up equally among 88 cities.
No,
Because
right.
LA.
In the past, it was by parcels, which obviously was kind of unusual and wouldn't work today, but we're looking at per capita or per capita plus square footage, because the money should go back to those high population cities if what we're trying to do is maintain highly impacted amenities.
Those are very different formulas. I mean,
Right.
I'd like to see it
Well,
per capita, obviously, for LA.
They are a little different.
So
But that's what's on the table. I will just tell you right now, per capita, using a formula of per capita back to each study area and per capita back to M&S, or using per capita and square footage of development back to the study areas and back for M&S.
And how
So
was
if you have a weigh-in on that, then we'd love to hear it and be happy to
How was
pass
it done originally in the original?
That was by per parcel.
you're saying per parcel, okay.
Yeah, it was
Well,
92.
I would imagine from an LA perspective, we would want to see it per capita.
Right.
You know, that could
Thank
be
you.
a major difference in dollars for us. So, a
I
weigh in
think,
on that.
I think
and
every
on
city
MS.
has that same response. I mean, City of Arcadia has exactly, City of Pomona, because it comes back. I think the smaller cities that have small populations and large development, like Industry and Vernon, have great desire not to see per capita, but they're very small cities. So, thank you for your input. I will be happy to take it back.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Blumenfield. Mr. Price.
Thank you. Thank you for for the report and for the efforts. It does sound exciting, especially when we look at what's happening across the country or what's not happening across the country. So I appreciate your efforts, and I think it's significant that Mike is up there with you, because I think the city and the county really do have to collaborate and try to figure out how we leverage limited resources, especially in underserved areas. And I'm just curious, what the study areas, you said there are about 15 in the city of LA? Or 20,
No,
was it?
43
Yeah, 43.
In LA?
in the city of Los
In the city of
Angeles.
LA, yeah. And so do we have the boundaries of those? I'm just curious what and you said there was a report on each.
So we do have the boundaries, and we can send those to you. And the boundaries were your community planning areas. Some of your community planning areas had more than 150,000 residents. So eight of your 35 planning areas had more than 150,000 residents. So those were bifurcated into 2 study areas, totaling of 43. So we can provide those to
Yeah,
you.
just kind of curious, especially those in the ninth. I'm
Sure.
especially curious about. And the issue about programming, about renovating structures or creating new parks is important. We've been able to allocate almost $35 million or so in the last year or so to parks in the 9th District, for example. But the real challenge is just programming. After you get the nice soccer field, how do you make sure you have some programming for coaches or youth programs in the renovated community center and so I think that has to be a focus of your attention also, because certainly creating the infrastructure is important, but you don't want it just to be sitting there or to not or kids not being able to really activate the improvements that have been made.
So that goes back to the
Well,
operations
right.
and maintenance.
I would say this, that what cities have told us, and what certainly a lot of the park departments told us, was that if you have a program that's granting funds for however many years it is, if it's programmatic and pays for staff, it becomes problematic, because when that funding goes away, you all are laying people off, and those programs, those communities go away. Whereas if you are funding them from the city's funding, whatever source that is, then there's this very much a better understanding of the city's funding, and it's not going to necessarily go away unless you have economic challenges, which obviously we've faced in the last few years. But we've really had to push back about putting program money in here. So I hear you, and I will take it back.
Yeah.
Those cities really-
And then finally, I know we've had some discussions with our own Parks and Rec about how we can better utilize facilities. And one thing we talked about doing, for example, are some job training, job outreach kind of functions at the parks a couple of days a week. That might be something that you take back too in terms of how we engage and activate the community more broadly with issues, and really turning the parks into real community centers where it's not just recreation but information, job training, if you will, and other economic development, community economic development possibilities.
Absolutely. And actually, there is a little bit of money in here for jobs. On the one category,
Yeah, it's
it
great.
was
Youth and veteran job training.
Youth and veterans job training. And so there will be some money that will actually go back into a lot of the organizations that they work with youth, whether it be one of the conservation corps or neighborhood land trust or organizations like that as well.
Or even if the city has a program that's working.
Right, workforce centers are there.
Yeah, exactly.
Workforce or youth source centers. There are lots of ways to kind of, I think, line those resources up. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wow, it's a lot of information to absorb. I'm very interested in this going forward, so I really thank you for bringing this up today. And I really want to thank the County Parks and Recs. This is a phenomenal study, and I could just imagine how difficult it was just trying to wrangle all the different cities and all the different areas. And Norma, good friend, known each other for a long time. I'm so glad you're leading this charge. First off, can we get a copy of the PowerPoint? I think it's a little.
You should have a copy in front of you.
I think that's a newer version. It had a little extra more sheets.
I'll send it to you. Yes.
Yeah. And then any report that you might have, maybe the project list, even if it's in draft format. Love to take a look at that.
The full report, got it.
And when you guys did the study for the park poor, park rich areas, did you kind of take into account any tourism as well? Because I just want to mention that, I think this is a pretty good, accurate map, and it shows a lot of the red areas. But there are certain parks, especially in the city of LA, and in particular my district, like Runyon Canyon, or even Griffith Park, Griffith Observatory, where we don't have I don't know if we have an actual traffic count, Mike, or visit count for Griffith Park, but we do know from outside sources for like Runyon Canyon, we have 1.8 million visitors a year just for that little area. And 80% of them are from out of the area, out of state, and even international. So it's so famous of a park. So while it shows that it's park poor for a particular area per 100,000, that still doesn't show like for regional parks like Griffith Park and Runyon Canyon, where it's even more dense because we're getting all these people coming in from park poor areas as well as internationally. So if you could kind of put that into your consideration. What portion from Prop A did the City of LA get, or the City of LA Recreation and Parks get? Do we know roughly?
Well, it's complicated because there were specified projects. So I can get you that report, David. It's
Okay.
just a matter of organizing it for the City of LA.
Great.
Okay, so I'll send you that.
That'll be good information to have.
Total dollars to the City of LA.
Yeah, for Prop A, because I just want to have a kind of a comparison.
To the city itself or to projects in the city? Probably both. Okay.
I mean, I don't know if that's different.
It would because you have Northeast Trees, you have the Land Trust, you have some nonprofits
Oh,
who
yes.
operate parks.
That would
MRCA
be-
would have got.
yes.
Okay, I'll give you both, but desegregated.
Great. And the new proposal is asking for $189 million a year. For how many years?
35.
For 35 years. Okay. Great. And where's my other question? In one of the slides where you had identified, 46% for repairing, refurbishing existing parks, 34% for adding new amenities to existing parks, and 20% new construction projects, which include about 200 new parks. These projects, how are they selected?
So they were selected by your residents, and we know, as a matter of fact, when we give you the full report is very extensive, and we try to be as brief as we possibly can. You'll see that most of the study areas requested a new park. So there was really no differentiating in regards to where the high need areas or the low need areas. Most residents wanted a new park, so there's a map illustrating what communities and what study areas wanted a new park. I would say most, 95% plus.
I definitely concur on that, just by, anecdotally, just meeting people in the district within the city. And I'm sure it was difficult. Community input is always difficult. Community outreach is always difficult. That's why I look forward to the project list you have. But I was wondering, is this absolutely set, the project list? I haven't even seen it yet, so I don't know.
So there's two aspects. I'll answer the first, and then I'll have Jane answer. In regards to the needs assessment, the report was published on May 9th. And so what we are doing is we are editing any discrepancies or errors that were made to the report. But, and I'll let Jane answer this one, that it does not limit cities or residents to, bring up new projects as it pertains to, funding distribution if the measure passes and all.
Right.
Things
So
change.
The measure is written so that the money goes back to the study area toward those top 10 projects in each study area, or those projects consistent with, because we understood with the community process, some of those I have a dream are not feasible, or you all know internally that it just won't fly for whatever reasons. So that it's about that study area deciding again, you guys overlaying what you can and can't do. And the estimates that are set on those projects, because those estimates are by project, are estimates. And while they're done very well with cost estimators and escalators in them, we still are not going to tie you to, it says in the needs assessment it costs $10.8 million for that project. The whole point of this was to be able to allow you to be able to get to those projects and the community needs at the time that it was happening for you.
So I guess an area will get an allocation based on projects, but it's still flexible. So the local jurisdiction will have flexibility.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Is there actual flexibility money that starts with, that a local jurisdiction starts off with, or is it all accounted for?
Category 1 would be the money that each study area starts with. So that 27% of the 189 would be divided into all the study areas maybe by per capita at the input given by here at the city council. But whatever that formula is, if it's by per capita, it'll go into per capita per each study area.
Okay.
And be set aside so you all can decide what projects. I guess that will more work on Mike's part and your all part.
Right.
Mike doesn't mind more work,
Yeah.
ever.
Mike enjoys it very
Some days,
much.
having money is good, but man, it's a lot of work.
So, but obviously, this allocation is based on the 40, not by cities, but
Right.
by the 43 jurisdictions, roughly.
You all have a challenge.
I'm sorry, 188 jurisdictions, and
Yes.
43 being in the city of LA, roughly 100,000, which,
For most
Yeah, for
cities,
about
it's only
4.3.
one study area, so
Right.
it's easy for them.
so the funding's allocated per
Study area.
study area.
Well, it makes it complicated for the city of LA. It actually benefits the city of Los Angeles in regards to the study areas. So that's the catch-22.
And this formula, the base formula can't change now. It's set.
No, it's not set. It's actually part of the draft measure. It says per capita plus square footage. And what we have input here is to use per capita, and I've had that comment from other places as well, so I'm putting that forward to the board offices.
Well, what about the tourism aspect? So I don't know how we would account, it's not per capita or square footage, it's kind of
I think
per
that's like
visit.
intensity of use of a park, no matter where it comes from.
Intensity of use.
So whether it's the density of the population around it or the people who actually visit, that's visitation. So we struggle with that because, we know a lot about parks just like Mike, and it's like, how do you calculate that? And I don't,
Yeah.
unless you use visitation, and not everybody has numbers on their visitation, I don't know how to get to it.
One of the things that we did do, and I was just sharing with Mike, is that unlike Proposition A, is that we did create a category for regional recreation parks. And in Prop A, I mean, in many of your communities, and I'm pretty sure, Mike, it was always about, if I have this limited money, do I spend it at the local park or the regional? And the regional parks never got its fair share.
Right.
So we did create a different category in the needs assessment, calling out 17 regional recreation parks, Sepulveda Basin, O'Malveny Park, Griffith Park, being those, so that there wouldn't be really a competition with the local parks. The trails, I think Runyon Canyon, while you may consider that, I think, a regional amenity, there are in the measure, in the draft measure, is also a category for trails, because we know that residents, I mean, your needs assessment told us that. I think it was confirmed with what we heard throughout Los Angeles County, that trails are very important.
Yeah, so that's, again, I'd love to see that report, the list, but yeah, I mean, some of our parks, whether it's Griffith Park or Runyon Canyon or numerous parks, just because of the mere usage, we have erosions in the trails and just,
I think our beaches have the
Yeah.
same issue.
right, it's not even from natural
No.
issues.
Wear
It's
and
just,
tear.
it's just, yeah, our parks are being loved to death.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that everyone's living healthier lives and exercising more. But again, I mean, I don't, and I'm sure the chairman's going to jump on this one. Don't even get me started on dog parks, right? Forget parks. We don't. I mean, just.
Hey, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, we're in a lack of, and I love your list here. And it seems like if you look through it, we are pretty much. I know you didn't rank it to other areas, but we are underserved in every single category. So.
Our dogs are family members too, right? and Mr. Rue makes up a great point in terms of the heavy use. And the flip side of that is some of our parks are overburdened because of lack of parks elsewhere.
Yeah.
Right. So that's striking the right balance when we identify allocations for existing parks and allocations to create new ones. All great points. Mr. Kretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Political consulting type questions. Do we know whether we think this is the best time for a ballot initiative, since this will be a historic long ballot, plus it'll include things like Measure R, which is at least as high, if not a higher priority, as much as we support parks and we know we desperately need them. How do we do in this environment? Did we try to poll for that? And how does Measure R do with the parks on there? Could we defeat Measure R by having this on?
Actually, you want to answer that? Want me to? Okay.
Either way.
Well, in our polling in December, we did ask about the transportation measure, because I don't know if it is R, but R.
I'm sure it's
R
not.
whatever.
Son of R.
I think
That,
they're now.
The Metro.
It
Metro,
didn't.
yes.
Neither one affected the other. They didn't make the other one fall out. No, like we did parks first and we did Metro first, and it didn't seem to make any difference. People were supportive in the same level after with that discussion. We are charged with polling in the next in the next month, we will be polling again and polling 3 potential county ballot items, which is transportation, homelessness, and parks. And we're preparing that survey right now. And one of the questions that we've been asked to look at as well is voter fatigue, which is, this is a very long ballot.
Yeah.
Do you get to the end? And so we are going to be polling that as well. And if you're interested in that outcome, we'll be happy to share it with you when we share it with the board.
I would be very interested. And one other thing to look at, how did Measure P that lost originally poll, and how much tendency is there to drop? And
Measure P polled at 69%, and
Or 60.
no, 63%. Sorry, the new one is 69. 63%, and I think the very late date, they put it on the very last day you could put it on the ballot. The lack of an advocacy group of any kind. So you're looking at 1 of 4 people who helped get the information out from me. And I have to say, some of you were very helpful with us in supporting that, but yeah,
Was there a campaign?
It didn't fall off very much at all because it came in at that number. But the thing is, you would have had to educate more individuals to get that number higher. And that
so it came in below the voting level
yeah,
already.
66 was what you needed, and it came in at 62, and so it was polling at 63. So it came in
That's
at what
a
it polled.
bad idea because usually initiatives drop unless they're supported by I think Arnold Schwarzenegger or someone did polls of that stature and were able to pull up their numbers, but usually not. So if we start at 69 and we actually have a campaign, I mean, are there plans to raise money behind this and actually?
There is an advocacy group called Our Parks LA, and they are doing some work and they have started some outreach.
Okay, and a couple non-poll questions. So one of the largest burdens for Rec and Parks has been taking on paying for DWP costs, et cetera. Can any of the money go towards this need that's really cutting into Rec and Parks?
What do you mean now? I'm not sure.
Utility
I understood.
costs.
Yeah, we're now having to pay for things
Water.
that we didn't charge back in the past, especially water.
Actually, yes. On maintenance and servicing, what that funding goes to is when you finish a project funded by the Open Space District, the costs that you go up, so say your electricity went up 20%, your water went up 30%, that difference you could charge back to the M&S money.
So if you were not necessarily building a brand new park, but
Right.
let's say you completely revamped the park.
Right.
Are you able then to help pay for the water and other costs?
Right. It would be
through
the
this?
differential in the new costs. Or we could take a look at, we can make the argument about what, in the revamping, you've now saved water, and so where are you in the cost because you now have more fields or less fields or whatever. But yeah, we would look at that, and it's really the differential is what we've looked at in the past. But utility cost is one of the costs that we do pay for.
Mike, you want to add?
No, I was just going to add, Councilmember, that I think that, as all of these projects that we'd submit, there's probably always going to be some level of conservation put in them. So there's a capital to that as well that will further help in our conservation efforts, I would assume, in any project that we put forward.
And
So-
efforts to pull in recycled water or solar or anything like that,
Right.
could some of those
That's
things
right.
be paid for by this
Right.
as well?
That's right.
Reduce costs.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Our steering committee made that very clear that, and while our steering committee was meeting, we had the governor that was really placing all of these restrictions on water. And so they were very concerned about more parks means more natural resources. And so there was a very concerted effort by the steering committee to ensure that new parks are built with sustainable elements. And looking at not a park built with lots of turf, but really looking at innovative strategies to put turf where needed, but not necessarily. And so lots of energy conservation, water conservation, recycled water, et cetera.
And of course, a lot of parks are looking at parts of the park that they can remove turf from.
Correct?
So obviously, if we're building new parks, we don't want to completely green them and then have to figure out how to
right.
back
Cost.
away from that. So, great.
Terrific. Thank you so much. So to wrap this up, and we do have a public comment card we'll get to in just a second. Okay, Bob.
One more thing. I know we're running low on time, but it's just thinking about it, I wanted to add a comment.
Okay.
Under the amenities, one thing I don't see, which probably doesn't normally get put under there, is wireless access.
Innovative media technology.
Okay, well, if you want to make this thing really popular, and you might want to check this seriously as you poll it, if you put a small percentage of this amount and you dedicated it to making all of the parks
Wireless.
wireless hotspots
Right.
with high speed, that would be very popular.
Yeah.
And it's something that's needed. We're starting. Mike can tell you about what we're doing. We have a pilot going in L.A. and it's wildly popular. We're trying to do it across the city, but a little bit of money goes a long way as far as that goes. And so I would, once we're asking you to take things back, I would urge you to consider putting in, not just sort of what you mentioned there that could be used for it, but to call it out, make it real, put it as a percentage, and make it a selling point.
Right.
I like it.
Okay.
Thank you.
In fact, even link it into CityLink LA.
And Councilman, I would add that you're absolutely correct, because it adds an additional layer of people using the park system as a result of that. And also to let you know that just today and we were written up nationally in the National Recreation and Parks Association on our Wi-Fi program. So, I mean, it's getting attention of people, so it's very, very good point.
And obviously you can add all sorts of layers to parks if you have that in there.
Well, I think you could show what's closed. I mean, I think you could have real-time communication between the Parks Department and the users of what's closed, what's open, how many people are on what trail, because as you talk about intensity of use, if you can turn people away from Runyon Canyon on a Saturday afternoon and onto Griffith Park instead, then that would be something that I would like to see as a park user. I mean, thank you.
Just my urging.
All right, thank you. Yeah, we have 5 more items, dear, so let's move this along. This has been a great conversation. Before you go, so my recommendations are as follows. Number 1 is that we want, I think that all of us here, in recognition that the City of Los Angeles is 40% of the population of the county, agree that the per capita approach is one value that we really find important. Also, any and all reports related to the study areas, as per Mr. Rue, in relation to the districts that we represent, those reports to come forward to us would be much appreciated.
Sure.
And then the Wi-Fi
Inclusion.
focus, the hotspots at all of our parks, really, really important moving forward. And I really appreciate you working with my office to take up your time to come here for this presentation. And I think that our other 10 colleagues are going to be very interested as well. So I'm going to recommend that sometime in June that you make a presentation to the full City Council, and we'll work on arranging that. I just think it'll be very important to get the feedback and make sure that our colleagues understand this fully. And again, this is informational only, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. With that, we will move to, actually, let me back up. We have Mark Malcheri, one comment card from Mark Malcheri. Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Yes.
Good afternoon, council members. I read this report, and I just want to point out a couple of things that I think you should take into consideration and your colleagues into consideration. The fundamental calculation that figures out need is based on proximity and population. So if you happen to be parked next to a big park, you drop down to the bottom of the needs list. For example, let's take the swath of land from the 5 freeway to the 405 freeway north of Sunset Boulevard, which runs the city. One community center, the smallest one in the city, Yucca. One basketball court, also at Yucca. One multi-purpose field, which is part of Briarwood Park, which is one extreme. One baseball field, which is actually an adult baseball field in Griffith Park. And one gymnasium, which is purportedly in Griffith Park, but I don't know where it is. That is the swath of land, which is basically the Hollywood Hills. Has no facilities. This report did not take that into account. It just divided proximity by population. What should have been done was come up with a score of actual facilities, raise that score number against the population, and then you would get an accurate account. So within this area that I just described, Silver Lake and Atwater Village have more facilities than that entire swath of land combined, because this calculation is fundamentally flawed. It can be fixed, but it's fundamentally flawed. And I believe that the city uses a similar calculation. So how can we have that swath of land have next to nothing in facilities, and this report recommends that facility-rich areas that have small parcels of land get more? So in my neighborhood, which I represent, Los Feliz, we're penalized for being next to Griffith Park. We don't have any of the traditional stuff. Golf courses we got, tennis courts we got, but this isn't just Griffith Park. This is 5 to 405. It's all in there. It's Appendix A for City of Hollywood and Beverly Crest, and I suggest you take a longer look at it because, you know, to any
Okay, Mark. So
problem.
if you have that to pass around to us, we'll definitely take a look. And it's good that you added comment because we just had this presentation and it's still in draft form. So I think that the panel will consider your remarks and
I appreciate that. I just think
respond.
that the city and the county has a very big task. They took the 50,000-foot view, which will get you a simple answer to a complex problem, which turns out more often than not wrong.
Okay.
But each of you should look at your districts and say, did we really get honest? They have all the data here. It's all put together. Take a look at it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Sure.
I represent Los Feliz, and yeah, those are the many questions we have, and that's why we're going to be following up recreation and parks. It's not just the issues that the gentleman raises, but it's also intensity of use as well that we talked about. So there's a lot more additional factors, and this is our. There was a lot of information presented today. I'm very, very much interested in this. Like again, I said, our parks are being loved to death, so we need to pay attention to this. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. All right. That brings us to number 2. Mr. Sutton-Willis, please read the item.
Item number 2, City's Planning Department and the Department of Recreation and Parks to provide information briefing relative to the proposed amendments to the Public Recreation Plan to modernize the city's Quimby and Fin fees, mitigating park and open space impacts.
Thank you. Please step forward. And Mike, if you want to have a seat again, and I know Tom Rothman, you're here too. Colleagues, I've invited staff from the Department of City Planning and Recreation and Parks to brief us on the proposed updates of the Parks and Recreation fee, which is also known as Quimby. It'll be in Plum tomorrow, and I want to thank our colleague, Councilman Jose Huizar, for holding that so we could get this report in advance of it going to Plum, because it's on a fairly fast track at this point after years of deliberation and consideration for how to update the Quimby fee system for the city of Los Angeles. So with that, please take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, council members, or good afternoon. My name is Nick Marisich. I'm a senior city planning in the Department of City Planning, and going to give you an overview this afternoon of the proposed update to the Parks Dedication and Fee Ordinance, which is also known as Quimby. So first, a brief overview of the existing park fee program. Then we'll talk about some of the key issues with the current program, the public outreach that was done as part of this process, and then a summary of the proposed ordinance.
And are we okay with the lights, or should we dim them again? Everyone okay? We're good then.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Thanks.
So our current program, the State Quimby Act was passed in 1965. It allows cities to require land dedication or charge a fee in lieu for new subdivisions to provide park space for new residents. In 1971, the City of Los Angeles passed its own Quimby ordinance, which created the framework for implementation at the local level. The original ordinance provided credit for project amenities. It specified locational requirements and exempted affordable housing units. In 1985, the city adopted what is now known as the Fin fee, which has required that multifamily projects requesting a zone change pay a fee equivalent to the local Quimby fee for subdivisions. And note here that most non-subdivision projects, which are a majority of projects in the city, are completely exempt today from paying any park mitigation fees. So some of the current program limitations include an outdated fee structure, limited ability to spend fees that have been collected, and a lack of land dedication. The department has taken up these issues in response to several calls to action, including a mayoral directive, 5 council motions, as well as the recently adopted Plan for a Healthy Los Angeles and Sustainable Cities Plan. The map here, although it's kind of small, shows you parks per 1,000 persons by the community plan areas. The darker the purple, the higher the level of park service. And you can note from the map that, in particular, South Los Angeles and the central areas in the San Fernando Valley are not very well served. So with respect to the first issue on the fee structure, here is a chart that's a little hard to read. It's showing you the current Quimby fees. These are assessed based upon the zone where the residential project is developed. Subdivision and zone change projects are charged these fees, which range from about $2,800 to $8,000 per unit. Note also that not all units are required to pay, given that non-subdivision projects like apartments are not assessed a park fee. And the current ordinance allows for the full deferral of all park fees for any project that contains a minimum number of affordable units, which has delayed the receipt of park fees for market rate units in those mixed income projects. Another issue from the current fee program is the limited ability to expend fees that have been collected. This is derived from existing provisions in the city's public recreation plan, which is part of the city's general plan service systems element. So these provisions include restrictive park service radii, as well as overly specific and dated language regarding the types of recreational facilities that are required. It talks about shuffleboard, table games, and lawn games. A third issue that we identified is the lack of land dedication from development. The State Quimby Act permits cities to require the dedication of parkland by projects greater than 50 units. However, in practice, the vast majority of developers elect to pay an in lieu fee instead. And by the time the fees are paid at the building permit stage, it's often too late in project design for land dedication to be considered and designed into a project. It's currently easier and cheaper to just pay the in lieu fee rather than to dedicate the land. And in addition, our existing credit system for on-site amenities is outdated and does not correspond to current construction costs. So we've responded to these issues with the proposed ordinance and a resolution to amend the public recreation plan. The CPC has approved on March 24th the draft resolution and ordinance. And the proposed ordinance would make a number of changes. First, it would eliminate the FIN fee, that's for zone change projects, and instead establish a new park impact fee that would apply to all non-subdivision projects. So not just those that require zone changes, but any non-subdivision projects. And this would address that problem where the vast majority of units in the city do not pay a per unit parks fee. And it would help to mitigate the impact of new residents on existing facilities. In order to establish this park impact fee, we did two studies. The city undertook a fee nexus study, which was attached to the transmittal and establishes the legal and policy basis for the imposition of the fees on new residential development. The fee study demonstrates that a reasonable relationship or nexus exists between new development that occurs and the need for these additional facilities. I calculated the maximum supportable fee that the city may adopt at $18,364 per unit. The city cannot adopt a fee higher than this threshold, but it can choose to lower the fee below the maximum level based upon policy, economic, and other considerations. The city also conducted and again, that $18,364 per unit would be to maintain the city's current ratio, park service ratio of 4.2 acres of city-owned parkland per 1,000 residents. We also conducted a financial feasibility and sensitivity analysis to examine different project types of different densities and in different price point markets around the city, which that analysis revealed that that these fees are sensitive to the scale of development, whether they're for sale and for rent, and what submarket they're within the city. The maximum amount that was found to be feasible for all prototypes that were tested was $12,500 for subdivision projects and $7,500 for non-subdivision projects. And the City Planning Commission also approved the exemption of both restricted affordable units, where it's restricted to those earning less than 120% of the area median income, as well as second dwelling units when added to existing single-family dwellings. Given that the city may choose to adopt fees below the maximum level identified in the fee study, we recognize the need to balance multiple policy priorities when it comes to imposing additional fees on development. So the City Planning Commission approved a more modest park fee increase which is $10,000 for subdivision projects. Again, that's up from the existing $2,800 to about $8,000. And $5,000 for non-subdivision projects, up from the current $0 per unit. These increases would be phased in over a 2-year period, which would help ease the transition for projects and provide time for future project developers to be able to incorporate the higher fee into their planning, design, and financial analysis. Additional adjustments will be possible in the future with additional data and analysis. The ability for development to absorb additional fees is limited, and the financial feasibility analysis determined the maximum amount that projects could absorb in fees. So these recommended amounts would provide a reasonable buffer for future mitigation fees to coexist with the park fees. And it's just also important to note that any amount less than the full $18,364 per unit would require the city to make contributions to cover the difference in order to maintain the existing park service ratio. But no future development.
Real quick question, Nick. How did you arrive on that formula?
On the
city making up the difference, should it be less than 18,364?
That was really based on the feasibility aspect of it. So the 18,364 was really the nexus amount per unit to maintain the existing level of service. So all of the numbers below that are really based on feasibility, and in order to maintain that mitigation aspect, the city would need to make up any difference that projects aren't paying on a per unit basis. That's really related to the Mitigation Fee Act, so that no development is paying for any impacts other than the ones that they're creating. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
The Department of City Planning is anticipating a number of upcoming cost increases for development, including a proposed affordable housing linkage fee, which is scheduled to be presented later this year, as well as other transportation impact fees, updates to development application fees, and other increased development costs that are ongoing. So here's a quick comparison of park fees in other cities. LA is on the low end today, particularly in that we charge nothing for projects that lack a subdivision or a zone change. And the proposed increases would help to raise the city in this comparison, although we would not be the highest in terms of these fees. In addition to modernizing the fees, the fee expenditure radii would be expanded as well. For neighborhood parks, the current radius is half a mile, and the ordinance would expand that to 2 miles. Community parks, which are currently 2 miles, would be expanded to 5 miles. And for regional parks, we would be adding a new radius of 10 miles where no radius currently exists. In particular, the regional park radius would help in allowing for park fee monies to be allocated to regional parks, river improvements, and other sorts of projects. Also, the proposed resolution would broaden the language regarding the types of amenities that are associated with each park type and remove that outdated language that I mentioned earlier. These changes will allow for the city to expand the expenditure of park fee monies, which otherwise have to be returned to a developer if they're not obligated to a project within 5 years. In response to the lack of land dedication, another key issue that was referenced, we have included a early consultation or pre-filing meeting requirement for subdivisions of 50 units or more. And this meeting could be satisfied through the pre-development meetings that are typically already held for such projects. The Department of City Planning, Recreation and Parks, and City Council representatives would participate in such meetings in order to discuss the project. And really it's intended to foster an exchange of ideas about how the direct provision of park space might be incorporated on a site. Related to this is a proposed update to the existing system of credits. The credits today are too low to provide sufficient motivation to provide parkland on site. So instead, the new ordinance would allow a project developer to satisfy 35% of their calculated requirement by providing privately accessible park space on their site above and beyond what they're required, or 100% credit if they're making that space publicly accessible. And we think this is going to help the city to obtain more park space directly as development occurs, rather than waiting for the collection of fees and subsequent expenditures. So I'm almost done here, and then happy to answer your questions. Just a quick summary of the outreach process that took place for this proposal. The city convened a park advisory committee to provide feedback and guidance as this proposal was developed. The group met 3 times between June of 2014 and 2015, and it consisted of a range of stakeholders from different interest groups. They identified We did stakeholder interviews to identify key issues, provided briefings to interested parties. We held an open house and public hearing last October on the 22nd, and the City Planning Commission approved the draft ordinance and resolution on March 24th. So just a summary here, the proposal strives to deliver a more effective park fee program for the city that will increase opportunities for park space creation by removing existing constraints, expanding the program beyond those requiring a subdivision map, to include a park linkage fee for all net new residential units. And happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Rothman, would you like to add anything? Or
No, not at all.
no? We're okay. Very good. Thank you so much. So you answered most of my questions again. And you last frame talked about stakeholder process in participation, public participation. How was the participation from the development community in this process?
I can answer that. As part of the PAC, the Park Advisory Committee, was made up of business groups, developers, park advocates, open space advocacy. So we had a really good cross-section. I have a list here, if you'd like me to read. The Alliance of River Communities, Building the BIA, Bureau of Engineering, California Apartment Association. So I'm not going to go into everyone, but we had a really good mix of people. So, there were some outstanding issues. It was hard to get resolution on everything, but at least there was a really good open discussion, and we had 3 very robust meetings.
Okay, sure. And then even the lead up to those meetings was quite, how long was the entire process? To me, it seems like it's been going on for a long time, but maybe I'm mistaken.
It's been quite lengthy. I'd say it's been going on for about 1.5 years now.
Okay. And you mentioned a 2-year phase-in. Can you just give some more details on that in terms of current projects that are in the pipeline, ones that are about to get approved? Where do they all land?
So this is something that the City Planning Commission also addressed in their, made some changes to the ordinance. So there's a provision in the ordinance that allows for projects that have already paid their fee to not then be recalculated if they've paid it prior.
If they have the approvals, they're done.
If they've paid their fees for the subdivision projects prior to the effectiveness, then the fees would not be recalculated. The City Planning Commission identified that there might be projects that aren't subject to a fee and that so therefore can't really be grandfathered under that same provision. So new language was added in section I3 of the ordinance and to speak to this and to allow for projects that would not otherwise be subject to a fee to be exempt from paying if they have paid their building permit plan check fees.
And so these projects that have been approved and you're just waiting on them to pay their current fees, are they all notified of the new ordinance that's pending and when it will go into effect, specifically by letter, or is it left to chance? Because invariably, we're going to hear from some developers who are like, wait a second, we're getting hit with this bigger charge, but it was all already approved.
We do plan on having a bulletin at our public counter as far as contacting every developer who has an application in. We're talking about it on the management level of the planning department, how we can best do that. It's not that easy. We don't want to miss somebody and tell somebody, so there's a lot of applications we have right now. Especially, it's going to be a big change for those who are not subject to these fees at all today.
Right.
But we hope by the fact that it'll take a while to get effective, and then the phase-in of another year. But we will have some technical bulletin available to everybody. And
okay. And I think the development committee has been following this pretty closely anyway. So I'm just wondering about the occasional surprise out of nowhere that invariably happens when we enact ordinances where there's so many moving parts. Okay. Thank you, colleagues. Mr. Koretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, I know we're increasing the radius of some fees. Will this only apply to new funds, or will this also allow us to deal with the existing funds that we may have lying around but not able to use because it's so restrictive.
Councilman Mike Shaw, General Manager, Rec and Parks. I believe, my understanding is that if we have not allocated those funds, by the time this goes into effect, that any unallocated funds could be used according to the rules of the new ordinance. Is my understanding.
And I would just add that those would still be subject to there's certain findings, expenditure findings that are required by the state law, the state Quimby law, and those would still apply in terms of using them at a greater distance. I think the state law uses the term neighborhood, so outside of the neighborhood, in another neighborhood, there are certain state law findings that are required. So those would still apply. But yes, our understanding is that the existing monies would be able to be used in the new radii.
And my only other concern is that the fees are still too low or lower than they could be. Is there any reason why, since we did a feasibility study of what the maximum amount was that the development community can handle, why we wouldn't charge that maximum amount?
Well, we did have a slide up there earlier about the oncoming additional fees that the planning department will be imposing, so we didn't want to just max out the entire feasibility of or a fee study of what a developer can pay. We did want to leave some buffer between the maximum and what this ordinance proposes. So there was just a little bit less.
So this allows the planning department to increase some of their fees as well without making it completely infeasible.
Correct. The housing linkage fee is very much on its way, so the council will be seeing that shortly. We have other development fees that are coming in. We've just passed our cleanup green-up ordinance that's imposing different development costs for projects, so we didn't want to eat up the entire feasibility by this one ordinance.
But this will still be a somewhat significant increase.
It'll be a very significant increase. It's going up dramatically, and it's certainly going up for those non-subdivision projects that don't get charged a fee at all today.
Now, we looked at other cities. How do they compare, and why are ours still lower? Did they have a higher feasibility level, or what was the reason?
Well, we do fall in with this with the proposals. If it gets adopted today, we do fall in somewhat in the middle. They have very different characters. San Jose charges about $38,000 per unit, which is considerably higher than what we're proposing. But other cities in our immediate area charge less. So it really all depended on our feasibility study and our fee study. So it's really balanced out.
I would just add that I think it also relates to, the way the analysis is done and then how you divide that up among the cities. So our fee study and feasibility analysis in particular looked at different submarkets and what the construction costs were and the rents that could be charged. And so the ability to absorb these fees can be varied across the submarkets within the city, and that I think is likely to represent some of the additional ranges that you see in other cities as well, where they may have particularly hot real estate markets. There might be more of an ability to pay versus areas where development maybe is not as cost effective.
And so do we have a different level for those, or we just hit the bottom number of what the least hot area could handle?
Yeah. The proposal is to have a single fee for subdivision, single fee for non-subdivision that would apply citywide. So we've taken a look at what the ability is of developers to pay in these different markets across the city, and then pick the one that works across all markets.
Okay, thank you.
And it's just one more tool to encourage affordable housing as well with the exemptions. So I like that particularly, and I'm glad that we worked on that element as well. Mr. Rue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Planning Department and the Commission for all your hard work over the past 2 years. And this is a great proposal and proposed improvements. I mean, it's going to increase funding for parks. I think between this and the last proposition, we're going to solve all your problems, Mike.
Can't come fast enough.
And of course, it's also going to clarify benefits for developers, support affordable housing, and with the exemptions of the affordable units, and allow more flexibility in how the city programs these funds. The question I had, though, was in the new proposal, the subdivision and the non-subdivision fees have increased to flat rates. Why are we not using a sliding scale in certain circumstances, like, and taking into account things like unit size or unit cost?
I think that the studies that were done really were looking at the impacts of additional population on the need for new parks. And so that is really, I think that the studies were looking at that as really being the same. The impact of a new person on the need for a park was the same regardless of the zone or the density. So it's really structured around that, impact, offsetting the impacts of the new population that's being added. And so the denser projects will pay more just by virtue of the more, greater number of units on a similar sized lot. But it was really just looking at the population and the impacts.
And we really did want to simplify this as much as possible. Right now, we do charge a sliding scale based upon your zone. So a higher zone pays more per unit than the lower density zones. And over the years, it does get very complicated to have all of these different fees. So we did try to make this as simple as possible. I expect that things will change a little by little, but inflation costs will go into this every year. So to factor in all of these different things does make a very large administrative burden on the planning department.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't know what the silver bullet solution is here, but sometimes, if they're building 5 luxury large units versus 15, and sometimes the luxury units sell for much, much higher. That was kind of the concern. The second one is, why are the rates for the non-subdivision, the rentals, lower than the subdivision? What was the thinking behind that?
That was really based on the feasibility study that looked at the ability to be able to absorb the cost of the additional fees. And the study found that subdivision projects had a greater ability to, within their profit margin, be able to afford the cost. And so apartment projects did not have as much room to be able to afford those fees. So that really set us in the direction of having those 2 tiers. It's really based on ability to pay.
Oh, okay. Are we taking into account for conversions, apartment and condo conversions?
Yes, so if the subdivision fees will apply if you do convert your apartment building into condos, it'll just be like you're building them brand new. It's the same process.
Oh.
You still have to subdivide your
They would
land.
have to pay $10,000 per unit.
You would have to pay $10,000 per unit unless you had paid previously under the fin fee or whatever else, then you would be subtracted. But
So if you built an apartment and paid the $5,000 fee, and then, 5 years later you convert it,
you would
have to pay the difference.
You'd have to pay the difference, correct.
Okay, great. For the affordable housing exemption part, I think that's a great idea. But why are we exempting the whole building if they have affordable housing, or just the units?
We do that today. We exempt all of the units.
We defer.
We defer, right? We defer all of the units in a building that has affordable housing in it, but we are proposing to change that in this ordinance. Only those that are affordable will be exempt.
So just to clarify, so if there's 10 units and 2 are affordable, they would still have to pay for the 8 non-affordable units. Great. And last question, why do we, for on-site residents, for the park calculation, how did you guys come to the 35% discount level for on-site parks or courtyards and for residents?
Yeah, so that number really came from looking at the need for the types of amenities the need for certain amenities that could be provided typically through on-site facilities really represent only about 1/3 of what the need is that's created. So there still be the need for ball fields and play fields and other types of amenities that are found at community and regional parks. And so it was identified that this really represented just 1/3 of that amount.
Okay, so it's based on the usage of the dwelling, the people in the dwelling, not necessarily outside use.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
So Mike Scholl, no more shuffleboard?
No.
Is that our big eye opener today? All right.
No. Still shuffleboard.
Mr. Price.
Thank you. I just want to congratulate you on this, the refiguration of the formula. I think it is better if we can include more and have everyone pay into it and really sort of channel these resources and give us a chance to use the resources in a much broader. So I think we're going from 3 miles to 5 miles. Is that the
From 2 to 5.
the
yeah.
locus of?
For the community parks from 2 to 5, yeah.
Yeah. So anything we can do to just expand and encourage those efforts, I appreciate. And
Thank you.
let's do it.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Thank you. Just wanted to drill down a little bit on the radius for the Quimby funds. There used to be a provision that you had to use it within the first radius, right? And we're removing that provision. Like, I guess the question more generally is there a way, or should there be a way to allow the Quimby funds priority within a smaller radius before we expand it to the larger radius?
The City Planning Commission they discussed that issue and wanted to address it, so they added a provision to the ordinance that requires certain findings to be made. If the council decides to keep that, that would be, the way it would work is really in kind of looking at the neighborhood first and the need there before moving out to the community, and then similarly looking at the need within the community before moving out to the regional radius. There are also, I would just add that regardless of whether that language is in there, there are expenditure findings in the state Quimby law about this that talk about if the money is going to be spent outside the neighborhood of the project that is creating the need, then there's additional findings. So those state regulations will continue to apply regardless, but the City Planning Commission did include in the proposed ordinance that's before the City Council, they included language that would prioritize neighborhood first, then community, then regional.
So we're expanding the radius, but we're expanding it with still certain thresholds that you have to get over?
That's correct.
Yes.
Mike, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, that's the understanding. I mean, the idea, when we've always done this, just as the city planning is explaining, we've always tried to put, and we always have to make a finding on the need, and so making that finding, we've always done that as we allocate funds. So, but it really is about identifying the highest need, and it has to fall within that correct radii, but we will continue to do that regardless.
Right. Although this is, I'm trying to figure out as we explain this to my constituents and saying, well, we might have a project in the West Valley, but that money could be used on the other side of the hill potentially, which is, 5 miles away as the crow flies. But that won't happen unless XYZ threshold.
Unless there are findings made that that neighborhood has sufficient park space, and then you can move it a little bit farther. But that would definitely have to be made.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing as there are no other comments, this was, again, an informational item, and I appreciate all of you taking the time to come in. It'll now go to Plum tomorrow. So thank you so much for all your great work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I'm going to recommend in the interest of time that item 8 that
Mr. Chair, we have
sorry, you know what?
public
we
comment.
Have one comment card, don't we? I'm so sorry. Elsa Tung. So sorry, Elsa, for making you wait, and then I had you right in front of me. From Neighborland Trust. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, council members. Hello. My name is Elsa Tung. I'm the Policy and Research Manager for the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust. The Land Trust creates and advocates for urban parks and gardens in LA's low-income, park-poor communities of color. And I'm here today to speak in strong support of the Quimby Reform Ordinance. Now, 2 years ago, we released this policy brief, which contains 6 concrete policy recommendations, and I'm pleased to say that all 6 recommendations are in the draft of the ordinance. From the policy brief, we formed the Parks for All Coalition to advocate for park resources for all Angelenos, especially to address the park inequities that low-income communities of color face. The Parks for All Coalition is now 50 members strong, including environmental, public health, and social justice groups from across the city. We've also engaged citizen park advocates from park-poor communities, collecting over 900 pledge cards and engaging 500 people at community meetings. Council members, as you know, this policy overhaul is more than 40 years in the making. And after a decade of motions and audits, we are thrilled that the Quimby Reform Ordinance is finally moving forward to the Plum Committee tomorrow. Overall, the ordinance brings the city's park fee policy into the 21st century. It includes an expansion, as you just heard, an expansion of the fee expenditure radii to maximize spending flexibility and opportunities. It also includes a modernization of the fee structure to reflect actual park impact and park development costs, including the creation of a new park impact fee. Council members, with this ordinance, you have the unique opportunity to make a far-reaching decision about what kind of park and recreation system Angelinos will have for generations to come. The Parks for All Coalition looks forward to meeting with each of your offices as the ordinance heads to full council. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tung, and your timing was perfect. Thank you. Colleagues, in the interest of time, item 8, I'd like to have that read now, Mr. Sutton-Willis, and then I'm going to make a recommendation.
Item number 8, LA for Kids Steering Committee Report, Ordinance, and Resolution relative to the 2016-2017 Proposition K assessment. And there's also a revised attachment document associated with this to correct the report.
All right. So what I'd like to do is approve the amended report, and it was a technical correction.
That is correct.
All right. Without objection, we will move the amended report forward on consent. So moved, which brings us to item 9, Mr. Sutton-Willis.
Item number 9, Department of Cultural Affairs report relative to the refund from the Arts Development Fees Trust in accordance with the 2014 adopted ADF Expenditure Plan.
Thank you. Colleagues, for years I've been talking about accessing the arts development fee. Since before coming into office and since coming into office, have worked closely with several arts advocate leaders, my colleague, Councilmember Huizar, and we took the bold move of unlocking these funds that were locked up for 10 years. The funds had been languishing, unused. We brought the entire city family together over a process that we adopted about a year and a half ago now, in collaboration, because we all believe so passionately in the arts. It was a huge win, not just for the art community, but for Angelinos in every part of our city, because of the approach that we took to update the ordinance to include all parts of the city that didn't have adequate access to the arts. The vote we took provided the Department of Cultural Affairs with an expenditure plan for the funds, which were scheduled to expire. In addition to the $1.7 million, new structured guidelines were adopted to allow the city to continue to spend millions more in the years to come. We created a system that will help us use the arts development fee to serve its originally intended purpose, and that is for the cultural enrichment of all through arts and the enlightenment that that brings across the city, as well as improve the look, the feel, and the spirit of our neighborhoods. Prior to taking that action, there were funds that had already expired, and that's what we're talking about here. And that is what is before us today. That said, we'll hand it over to our presenters, and I believe we have Felicia Filer and Kimberly Mira. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, committee members. Councilmember, your summary was exactly correct. And when Council approved the expenditure plan in 2014, what we failed to do was to get controllers' instructions to process those refunds. And as we began the process of notifying developers and processing claims, the controller's office indicated that they, in fact, needed instructions to move ahead. So in many ways, this transmittal is sort of a technical correction to that initial report. And so we are asking for recommendation and authority to process the refunds that we've received claims for with interest, and including the controller's instructions. We did show the report to the controllers, and so they, we wanted to make sure that they had all the language in it that they needed to do their jobs accordingly.
Thank you. Ms. Mira?
I don't have anything to add, but I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
Terrific. Thank you. And one of the objectives that the guidelines that we approved made for, just for the record, is that they were so restrictive before, and the guidelines allowed us to make findings that just because all the development might be in one particular neighborhood, that the impact of the development fees could be felt further away geographically than perhaps they were before, should we make the proper findings. So the whole piece about spreading art and resources more equitably to other parts of the city was a high value in this entire approach. So again, I commend the department on that great effort and goal. And of course, my colleague, Mr. Huizar. It was just terrific to work with he in his office. And so question, is there a date certain? Are we looking at are we against the wall on any particular date certain for these funds?
Well, we have received claims, and so we'd like this report to go to council forthwith so that we can begin processing them over the next month or so.
Terrific. And we've taken this up before in terms of contacting, notifying developers of unclaimed accounts. Could you just briefly take us through that process again?
Yes. Again, we, in writing this report, we tried to err on the side of being very conservative. So we identified the arts development fees that are subject to a refund that are over the department's threshold of $47,000 to get instructions to begin the refund process for those. And then there are fees that are underneath the department's threshold that we can process. So we segregated that chunk of fees out so that we can get the authorization to process those. And in the event that a developer does not respond to the refund claim, then we wanted to just state for the record that those fees will remain in the Arts Development Fee Trust Fund to be used for the original intent. So we just wrote the report in the segments to try to be very clear about which pockets or which addresses were being affected so that we have clear instructions moving forward.
Terrific. And those are some of the elements that we're approving today.
That's correct.
Thank you so much. Mr. Koretz.
So I wonder if you could give me a 1-minute summary on how we have this money to begin with. Did we not outreach to the council offices to make sure they were aware of it and spend it? How did we get in this situation?
The ordinance was written in such a way that was pretty restrictive. The nexus had to be directly tied to the property that generated the fee. And there was a previous policy that it had to be within a one block radius of the property. In part because of Councilman O'Farrell's urging and the department's urging, and our office worked with the department to re-examine the ordinance and look at the policy. And I think that the previous policy of limiting this expenditure of the funds to a 1-block radius really prohibited a lot of the opportunities that the fees could be spent on. So now, so there's money built up in the account, but now that money is being freed because the policy has been updated. So
are we 100% sure we really need to refund this money as opposed to using it?
Yes, and actually that was the subject matter of a closed session that we did with council about a year ago, I think. So I can't really go into detail about it, but I'm more than happy to meet with you one-on-one.
No, I don't need that level of detail, just an assurance that we looked at that carefully. Have we done anything to, in this process, notify the people but ask them not to ask for the money?
I believe, Ms. Ballot, she can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the notice to the developer states that if they do not wish to seek the refund, examples of what that money could be used for.
I mean, could we be more direct and actually ask them if they would be helpful enough to not ask for the money back?
Well, they're legally entitled to the money back.
Correct.
So.
I understand, but I think as we notify them of that fact, we also could say that it would be appreciated if they would not claim it so we could use it for those following things and be a little more direct.
Again, I think what in the letter that we sent the developers, we specifically identified, some ideas, for example, a youth program or, public art program or, community program. We had about 2 or 3 different sort of broad categories that we encouraged there, if they wanted to forego the refund, that the funds would be used in that manner.
So we did encourage them to not claim it.
We gave them the offer that if they chose not to claim it, that we would use the funds in these specific program areas. That was specifically called out in the letter.
Okay, I think we're missing my point, because I think we've given them the
We are not
alternative.
asking the developers to surrender the money.
Is there any reason why not?
If I may interject, we heard this about a year ago in committee. The date escapes me, but and Mr. Kretz, you didn't have the luxury of being on the committee, but we thoroughly vetted this, and we know that the language had to be crafted very, very carefully for legal reasons.
Correct.
I mean, I wanted to insert that this would help them get into heaven, but they didn't accept that. No, I'm just kidding. But I think that we landed on language that could send the signal that, hey, there are ways to simply not accept the refund that could actually fulfill its original intent. And I don't have language in front of me, but I think that's the point of view that we wanted to get across, if I may.
And do you think we adequately get that across with the language that's currently in use? All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Blumenfield.
Yeah, I remember the whole discussion we had in closed session about this, and I remember I raised the issue about tax deduction. I don't remember what happened with that. We were going to look into, is there a way if they don't claim this money back, to get a tax deduction, and that there might be a win-win, but it was tricky because the money was also money they had already spent.
So, Mr. Blumenfield, we did reach back out to your office regarding this at the time that you raised it. We consulted with our outside counsel. We actually don't provide tax advice ourselves, so we reached out to our outside tax advisor, who advised us not to give any advice, because every developer's situation is different, whether they received a tax deduction when they gave the arts development fee, it was very complicated. So there is language on the letter for them to seek counsel, to seek their own counsel regarding their individual tax circumstances.
Okay, great. And then how long, if we contact them to let them know they have the refund pending, how long, if we don't receive any response back, does it take before the money reverts back?
Is it 6 months? Or is it longer?
We gave the developers 90 days to respond, and those that did not respond, the time frame has ended. However, we are just holding for an additional 6 months any of the responses that we didn't get in the event that somebody comes at the 11th hour.
In the event that there is an issue down past the 90 days, the department is holding on to the funds in a reserve for 6 months.
Do we have to know that we send a letter out to our best known address, or do we actually have to make a contact?
The ordinance requires that the letters be sent to the current property owner, not the original payer of the fee. So it's actually pretty easy to determine who is the current property owner, and so that notification is sent.
So it's sent, but is there a requirement that there's some sort of acknowledgement they received it?
No.
Well, yeah, I mean, the ones who filed a claim responded.
Sure.
And
in terms of the ones that don't, how long is it before we can count on that money? So it's 90 days, we think we have it back, and then 6 months, we think we're more legally safe to revert that money.
We're actually within that 6-month period now, and we just, are just holding it until June 30th. But technically, the end of May is that 6-month period. The end of that 6-month period runs out.
At the end of?
May.
May. Mm-hmm. So at the end of May, we'll know exactly how much money reverts back.
Correct.
That's great. And what percentage has already been claimed?
Half.
Okay. Interesting. All right, great. Well, that's theoretically, we may be swooping in, getting half that money back. That's
yes.
Terrific. Any further comments or questions, colleagues? Okay, I'm going to recommend that we move the report forward and get this going and get these monies so we can create great art across the city of LA. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Without objection, Mr. Villanueva, I believe that completes all of our items, and there are no further comment cards.
Yes, sir. That clears the desk.
Thank you, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.